Day down at the state capitol. This was the scene earlier just a couple of hours ago. Hundreds of people were out there as part of a national day of protest against the Trump administration on a range of topics, including the cuts to federal workers, mass deportations, and the like. We've got a live shot now. There is still a crowd at the Capitol. Several dozen people are out there. Just a few minutes ago, there was another event really tailored to some local legislation that's been introduced at the state capitol by Republican lawmakers. Republican lawmakers have introduced what they're calling the Arizona Immigration Cooperation and Enforcement Act, the Arizona ICE Act. Critics say these policies will support racial profiling and scapegoat immigrant families. The bills would do a number of things. One bill would order the governor and the attorney general to cooperate with and enforce all federal orders on federal immigration laws. Another bill would require Arizona hospitals to track how many undocumented patients they're caring for. They would not be allowed to report patients to ICE. And then the third bill that's really gotten the most attention would require local police in Arizona and local jails to do more to support immigration enforcement. It would also require cities to enter into partnerships with ICE. And on the flip side, it would tell cities and towns you are not allowed to do anything to restrict law enforcement cooperation with federal immigration authorities. So here's what Republicans are saying in response to the criticism today. Senate President Warren Peterson put out this statement saying, after the past 4 years of lawlessness at our border, it is imperative that every level of government supports efforts to safeguard our communities from the harms of illegal immigration. He went on to say that Arizona is a border state, and as such, we need to empower our sworn agents to enforce our laws and assist the Trump administration's efforts on this front. In the Breaking News Hub, I'm Derek Stahl for Arizona's Family.